The demonstrations in the middle of May 1980 that provoked General Chun's final crackdown and later seizure of the government were nationwide. In the southwestern city of Gwangju, the hometown of longtime opposition leader Kim Dae-jung, a small demonstration of Cheongnam National University students demanding the end to the martial law and the release of Kim Dae-jung was set upon by black battery paratroopers who indiscriminately beat and mauled, even using bayonets, demonstrators and spectators alike. After several days of such brutality, the citizenry of Gwangju responded en masse and drove the special forces and police out of the city in what became a full-fledged insurrection. For a week, Gwangju was cordoned off and isolated from the rest of the country, while a citizens' council attempted to negotiate a truce with the army. They also appealed with no success to the United States to intervene. On May 27, regular troops invaded the city to reimpose martial law. Students who had armed themselves during the insurrection with abandoned weapons were slaughtered in the fight. When it was over, hundreds were dead and thousands injured. The official death toll was set at 200. But witnesses to the tragedy claim many more had died in the fighting. Chun's willingness to use the army against his own citizens demonstrated his ruthlessness. The Gwangju massacre, however, became the turning point for a grassroots movement that will decisively alter the course of post-war Korean politics in the summer of 1987.
By the mid-1980s, student organizers were successfully beginning to create connections to a long smoldering labor movement in Korea. Wildcat strikes and other calls for reformed labor law emanated from organizing workers from the myriad textile sweatshops, and these demands were seconded by increased unrest within the huge labor force of the giant chaebols. By 1986, these forces began to combine in ways that prevented the selective repression by the government. Now the increasing size and belligerence of the demonstrations threatened the successful staging of his coming out party. Chun deflected the race tensions in 1986 by acceding to discussions on constitutional revision in preparation for the election of his successor in 1988. But in April 1987, he reversed the course and cancelled the talks. 2 months later, he appointed his colleague Woo Tae-woo head of the DGB and candidate for the fall presidential elections. This move precipitated an explosion of protest. The summer of 1987 witnesses the worst street fighting since the demonstrations of the 1970 and 1980 following the assassination of President Park. As usual, students were in the lead, but as the situation worsened, it was clear that more and more ordinary citizens were joining in the light. By June, the demonstrations were pulling hundreds of thousands of people into the streets, and the national police were being overwhelmed. Moreover, the demonstrations had spread to every city in South Korea and were drawing unprecedented numbers of people for what had usually been smaller secondary actions in the provinces. The combination of citizen participation, the lack of youth support, and the sheer size of the demonstrations compelled the government to back down. On June 29, Chun's hand-picked successor, Woo Tae-woo, unilaterally issued a, quote, declaration of democratization and reforms that promised a new election law, press freedoms, local elections of mayors and governors, restoration of civil rights for Kim Dae-jung and other political prisoners, and bold new, quote, social reforms. 2 days later, Chun accepted the proposal and the crisis passed. At long last, and by the sheer force and breadth of public demand, a South Korean authoritarian regime had been forced to accept terms for a peaceful transition towards a new, more open pluralist democracy. The long struggle to democratize Korea had apparently ended in victory.
The transition to democracy in South Korea in the late 1980s significantly impacted culture, especially music. From the 1990s onward, there was a rise in the emergence of independent artists or those backed by agencies, marking a significant shift in Korean popular culture. So Taeji's voice, though relatively unknown to many overseas, had a profound influence on the South Korean population, especially the youth. The frenzy they created can be understood in the context of the preceding decades, when artistic material underwent rigorous review and music censorship or prohibition by ethical committees was a commonplace. Starting in the 1990s, the committees relaxed their stance on popular entertainment, leading to a notable increase in live broadcasts of pop concerts. Change within South Korean society also contributed to the rise and success of these groups, as mentioned by author Malin K. 2014. The South Korean government's opening to foreign travel was a significant change. After the transition to democracy under the administration of Roh Tae-woo, Overseas travel for citizens became more accessible. As a result, the number of Koreans traveling abroad for tourism or educational purposes rapidly increased. When many Korean Americans returned to Korea to travel, study, and work, this fostered a more natural cultural exchange. Prior to Sotaeji Boys, the Korean music industry was primarily influenced by American military folk music and Japanese music due to South Korea's colonial history. However, in 1988, when the travel ban was lifted, the exposure of South Koreans to Western music significantly increased. Sotaeji Boys, incorporating westernized music elements like rap, rock, and techno, became an inspiration for the new generation of students and successful boy bands like Hot. This marked a significant shift after an era when music in South Korea was predominantly patriotic. Thanks to them, the idea of what was considered normal in music expanded, paving the way for greater experimentation in the genre. The distinctive features that have made the boy band special and innovative in the eyes of the masses were concentrated in their discography and style. They innovated and set many popular music, dance, and personal style trends. Sotaeji Boys' debut album released in 1992, Sotaeji's music stood out of its innovative use of rap and sampling from various Western popular music genres, creating what was described as fast-paced dance or rock ballads. The style and aesthetics of Sotaeji Boys were highly notable. The clothing they wore received both praise and criticism, and whatever they wore became a trend. Many believe that they introduced the American hip-hop fashion to Korea, as their style showed influence from rap and hip-hop genres among all the three members of the group. Throughout their 4 albums, they popularized a snowboarder look and made the use of gloves iconic. Even for subsequent bands, they often wore caps, hats, or bandanas, maintaining a conservative style. However, in 1993, 2 members of the group decided to grow semi-long dreadlocks, which resulted in the ban by the national broadcaster KBS. Sotaeji's impact was associated with the LA band culture in the United States, but what led to the partial censorship of their performances was the perception of nonconformity in Korea associated with their style. Sotaeji Boys announced their retirement in the song Goodbye and decided to disband in 1996 at the top of their career to avoid losing popularity. Sotaeji was considered a true artist who genuinely cared about social issues and making art rather than monetizing it. In the end, this group became the face of an entire generation that wanted to leave behind their past and broaden their horizons.